Good afternoon and welcome to Columbia Rotary on July 13th, 2015. We're glad you're here. We'll get started today with the singing of our national anthem. Will deliver our invocation today.
Let us pray. Lord, as we gather today as fellow Rotarians, we gather with a heart of thanksgiving. We thank you so kindly for the love, the compassion, the grace, and the mercy that you've shown towards us. Lord, please grant us wisdom, knowledge, and understanding on how to help make the world a better place. Thank you for giving us a mindset to want to ease human suffrage. Lord, bless our troops and our diplomats. Bless our leaders. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. You may be seated. Thank you, Veru. Let's see, our visiting Rotarians and guests today will be handled by Becky Earhart as she makes her way up here. If you'd all put some money in the cart bucket, or the Alzheimer's research bucket on each table. Take a minute to put a dollar or two in the bucket today. Becky.
Good morning. We have one visiting Rotarian today, Adam Daughtry. And there he is in the back. Adam, welcome from the Columbia Capital Rotary. Any visiting Rotarian? That was okay. We've got a guest, Sunny White.
Good afternoon, Sonny White. I've got a visitor this afternoon, yes, with me, Jack Hoekstra. Jack is with Middle Central College, responsible for advancement in the foundation of the college.
Thank you very much.
Okay, welcome everyone. We have one more guest.
I would like to introduce Charlotte Holly today. Charlotte's sitting over on the far side. Stand up, Charlotte, and say hello. She's with the Savannah River National Laboratories and came to help Sharon, our speaker here today. And thank goodness she brought her laptop because our plug didn't fit any other laptop but hers. So thank goodness she's here. She's well prepared today.
Thank you, Becky. Hal Stevenson now is going to come up and share health and happiness.
Thank you, Mark. We look like our club is very much enjoying the beach in the summer this week. People are straggling in. Heard a lot of people complaining about the heat, and then a lot of people saying, why are you complaining? We get this every year. So anyway, I did get something from Bill Dukes. It was out of the Fort Jackson Leader, and one of their guys, Captain Jeremiah Hunt, attended our leader cast. I thought that he did a great summary of it, but the sentence that I took out of it for your your information is, he said, the experience was reinvigorating to say the least. I left LeaderCast eager to improve my organization regardless of what resistance I meet. So John Johnson's not here today, but we thank him and everybody that put that on. I think it went farther and wider than the Rotary Club itself, so it went out into the community. I have not seen Don Ryle here today. I think most of you probably heard that her son John passed away. You guys that didn't make it to the funeral, it's a good thing because you might not have been able to get a seat in there anyway. It was a packed house at Eastminster. Elliot, is there anything you have from any of that you'd like to share with us in any way, or?
No, just her son, Stuart Ryle, who's at CUI, his eulogy, and that young man's going to be somebody that we'll all be hearing about.
Yeah.
Amazing young gift from God, and just continue to pray for the family, please.
Will do. Y'all keep them in prayer. So Wes Hickman is the organizer this year, and asked me if I do health and happiness today, and I started looking at Rotary jokes and thinking about what I might do, and the only one I saw was that was one joke that said, you know, there's two kinds of people that don't communicate much, ones that are quiet and ones that talk too much. So I didn't want to give that joke, I thought people might put that on me, but I did want to talk briefly. Mariva, I think, alluded a little bit to in her prayer about what happened last week, and it was a very emotional week, I think, for a lot of people on both sides that might have been historical Confederate family, sons, daughters of Confederate veterans, but also for a lot of folks that really came face to face with themselves in a way they'd never seen. As you know, I've never been shy about my faith and have talked about it, you know, on occasion from the podium. I think that for me, and what I think a lot of people is, we've equated sometimes our Christianity with, you know, what we do or what we think or what our theology is or some other things, but what I think happened was seeing those family members show grace. I think all of us saw it's not your theology, it's how you act out what you say you believe. And so we have been reading about grace and thinking about grace, and I thought, again, I know this is Rotary and not a Christian organization, but one of the things that we talked a lot about last week in a couple of forums is sometimes people fear proselytizing, and I think that what we need to be as Christians in our society is more like those family members down in Charleston. So since I don't have any more jokes, I wanted to ask those of you that are of a mind to do so. If you wouldn't mind, I thought it would be appropriate, of course, to sing Amazing Grace, the first stanza, which I think probably most people know. If you don't worry about it. And I'm going to try to lead us, so if you will, please. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Very good, thank you. I have to be a little resistant from that. So may God bless South Carolina. We've got a lot of good news. Let's keep that going. Thank you very much for you.
Thank you, Hal. That was touching. Well done.
Well done.
We've got a light agenda. agenda today. We have an announcement on the back end of our program, but we're ready now to turn the program over to Harry Jeffcoat to introduce our speaker. Harry's a new member to our club, and we're happy to have him. He's going to introduce our speaker today, Sharon Marra.
Thank you, President Mark. And just a word, I was told to also say a few things about myself, so I'm not a narcissist, but apparently this is going to be something new that we're doing, is to ask new members to say a few things about themselves, maybe correct some things that Rusty said about them in introducing them to the club, and then to introduce our speakers. So I am thrilled to be back in the club. I know many of you, a decade or so ago, I had the pleasure of being a member of the club for a number of years. So it's a reintroduction in a way. I was born in Columbia. I grew up in Lexington, so whichever side of the river is more convenient in a given situation, I claim that. Attended Lexington High School and graduated from U.S. Capitol Page School. Fortunately, Joe Wilson is not here, who can tell stories about that high school time. My undergraduate degree is not from Wofford. I have no Wofford connection, but I graduated from the University of South Carolina. Here's Jimmy Derrick. Yes. Went to graduate school at Columbia University in New York and continue now to study, working on a Master of Divinity at Reformed Theological in Charlotte. Trevor managed to finish. Whether I will finish or not depends on whether I can get through Greek, which I say till the end. I am married to Lenora, who is on staff at First Pres. She is an organist and assistant director of music there. She also has no Wofford connection. She is a pastor's daughter, so Rusty, hopefully she can finally get me straightened out. We are thrilled to be expecting our first child in November of this year. Spent much of the first half of my career working with J.P. Morgan Chase overseas, doing a lot of work in Venezuela for over a decade. And got to work on a lot of interesting projects as it was booming there, and have seen the tragedy of socialist, Marxist economic policies and what that can do to a country. Very tragic what is going on around the world. The Jeffcoats have been here for about 250 years, and we haven't done a whole lot other than multiply. But after 20 years of living away, you really do begin to appreciate a lot of things about Columbia and Lexington. And so I came home. I'm pleased to be a part of First Community Bank. Jim Levinas is not here today, but many of you know Jim started that bank about 20 years ago this year, along with another Lexington boy, Mike Craps. And I do commercial lending downtown, and just blessed to be a part of that organization. Now enough about me. We are pleased to have Sharon Marra with us today. Sharon has no Wofford connection that I know of at this point. She is, and I'm going to read this to make sure I get it right, long title, Senior Vice President and Deputy Director of the U.S. Department of Energy's Savannah River National Laboratory, operated by Savannah River Nuclear Solutions. She's going to explain to us how all that works, hopefully. She is a native of Western New York State, and her husband is also a native of Western New York State. They have a 14-year-old son who's beginning high school this year. They love Aiken in the wintertime especially. And she attended Alfred University, also in Western New York State, and I learned a little bit about it. It has a very unique program in ceramic engineering because it's located close to where Corning, we're all familiar with Corning glassware, but they do a whole lot more than glassware. And the ceramic engineering, for those of you who wonder, is not about the little things we painted growing up. She has been with Savannah River at the Savannah River site for over 25 years and over 2 decades in management there. And it has gone through a lot of transitions, which she'll tell us about. I was telling her when I grew up, this will date me a bit, in South Carolina, I used to say with pride that we made the stuff for the bomb here. So that is no longer something we speak about so much with pride, so we'll hear about what they do now. Sharon, we're very happy to have you with us. Please give her a warm Columbia Rotary welcome.
Thank you very much. One comment I'd like to make is this is one of the most welcoming organizations I've ever interacted with, and so you should all feel very proud about that. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be here. And even though I'm not a native South Carolinian, I love living in South Carolina, and I don't ever plan to move. So I appreciate the welcome. The focus of the talk today, and I realized I forgot the little clicker, is primarily focused on the Savannah River National Laboratory. But I'll touch a little bit on the Savannah River site. Charlotte has put a couple of these booklets on each table that talk about the Savannah River site. If you aren't familiar with it or you remember it from years ago, there's background in here on all the facilities on the site. I'm not going to touch on that. I was going to focus on the National Laboratory, but if there is any questions, I'm sure between Charlotte and I, we can answer them. And a lot of this information is on our website. So we're really trying to outreach into the community, both locally and regionally. So please take a look at this and give you a little bit of background on where the Savannah River site is today. And for those of you that may not be familiar, it's a site about 80, 90-minute drive from here, 300 square miles, run by the Department of Energy. Currently, there are several contractors on the site. The Savannah River Nuclear Solutions Company that I work for is the management and operating contractor on the site, but there are other contractors on the site that run the liquid waste mission, Savannah River Remediation, and then Areva is building the MOX facility that you may have read about in the paper on the site. And then there are some support contractors and security and that type of thing. So the site currently has a little over 11,000 people or so. Our company, Savannah River Nuclear Solutions, is in the 5,000, 5,500 range, and the Savannah River National Laboratory that I'm part of is a little over 900 people. So the majority, I'd say more than half of the people live in the Aiken, South Carolina area, with others living across the river in Augusta, Georgia, and some of the small towns around Aiken as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the Savannah River National Laboratory, as I mentioned. The organization as an entity has been around since the site was formed back in the early 1950s. But last spring in 2014, we celebrated 10 years actually as a national laboratory. And the significance of that, being named a national laboratory, broadened our reach from just focusing on the Savannah River site to across the country, across the region, across the country, and internationally as well. And I'll touch a little bit about that. We aren't a huge organization, as I indicated, but we can open doors for interaction with industry, universities, and I'll touch on those things, and then international entities as well. The pictures on these slides are from the lunch that we had celebrating our 10th year anniversary last April-May timeframe, and I think you recognize some of the faces in the picture there who came and joined us for lunch, and they're not only South Carolina representatives, but there were also several from the state of Georgia as well that participated with us. In the last few years, especially the latter part of us being a national laboratory, we're really trying to reach out to grow our technologies and our capabilities, interface with industry, as I mentioned, and under our lab director's leadership, really trying to do a little bit more advertising of what our capabilities are. So if you think about what are those national type initiatives, and these pictures some of them will look familiar to you as well. In the upper left-hand corner there is a picture of some high-level waste tanks, and Carrie and I were talking earlier about the high-level waste that's present at the Savannah River site, and some of you may have heard about that in the news. There are approximately 30 million gallons of high-level waste that we're working to clean up, and this is a legacy from our weapons program. There are 51 waste tanks at the Savannah River site, and 6 of those have been closed, meaning completely emptied of waste and filled with grout and stabilized. The Savannah River National Laboratory has helped in all aspects of the process development for treating that waste. It's being converted into a glass waste form for ultimate disposal at a to-be-named repository. So the cleanup of this legacy waste is our moral and legal obligation. And the National Laboratory is proud to be able to participate on that in the Savannah River site. And then more recently, we were reaching out to other sites across the complex to share our expertise and our knowledge that what the things we've done at the Savannah River site to support those sites in the country as well. And I'll touch on that a little bit more. One of our other main mission areas besides environmental stewardship is national security. Obviously, the safe storage of nuclear materials is critical. There are a lot of dangerous factions in the world right now, as we all know. And the laboratory has had a lot of contribution using our decades of experience dealing with nuclear materials in order to safely store and in some cases process those materials so they are no longer accessible to organizations that might want to do us all harm. The third main area that the laboratory focuses on is energy. As y'all know, if you filled up your gas tank lately, it's cheaper than it was, say, a year and a half ago. But it's a continuing battle to make sure that we have a sustainable energy supply. And one of the things that we focus on is related to energy is it's a small program for us, but we look at regionally, what are the key things that the Southeast region might want to rely on from an energy perspective. Things like solar and wind energy may not be applicable in other parts of the country, but they may be very applicable here in the Southeast. So that's a growing program for us, and I'll touch a little bit more on that too. So, as in the case with all of you, customer satisfaction is critical. And that's one of the things, having grown up, if you will, with the Savannah River site and supporting the facilities on the site, it's really critical that we solve our customers' problems, not just perform a science project, if you will, but actually solve the customer's problems. And that takes a multidiscipline approach. As many of you that work in industry have the same goals and objectives. So you can see some of the logos on this slide. We work with many different federal entities. We are a Department of Energy Office of Environmental Management laboratory. However, we interface with many different offices of the Department of Energy as well as other federal agencies, especially related to our national security business. And then also commercial entities. This isn't a huge part of our portfolio, but we're trying to share more of our technologies and interface with the commercial sector more than we used to do. And those logos up there are just some of the companies that we have agreements and arrangements with. So, as I alluded to earlier, we have three main business areas that we focus on. And the first one here being national security. The tritium facility at the Savannah River site, some of you may have heard of that. That's been around since the beginning. But tritium is an isotope with a relatively short half-life, and it's critical to our nuclear deterrent in this country. And we have developed the equipment, the instrumentation, the processes are all related with the formation and the management of this important isotope. And so we continue that today. This is still an operating facility at the Savannah River site, so we continue that support. But we're also taking the expertise we've developed over the decades with that and taking it into new areas related to national security. One of those areas is medical isotopes. This country is in desperate need of medical isotopes for cancer-type treatment. Typically, over the last many years, we've obtained those isotopes from Canada, and they are getting out of the business, so to speak. So we are working with several commercial entities in this country to try and make sure that we have an isotope supply that's desperately needed by the entire population. And that's building off of our years of experience with tritium. We also have some interaction with the National Security Agency. They have an office based at Fort Gordon across the river in the state of Georgia, near Augusta, Georgia. And again, that's building off of our knowledge of nuclear materials and signatures and things that might indicate other countries, other entities performing work that might be detriment to the national security. The picture in the lower right-hand corner is of our mobile plutonium facility. This is another unique capability that the Savannah River National Laboratory has put together. This is basically a series of Sealand containers, the large containers you might use to ship things, that have been put together and have been instrumented with packaging type equipment and instrumentation. And this facility could literally be dropped anywhere in the world with a military aircraft and to be used to stabilize, characterize, package, potentially ship nuclear materials that may be obtained from somewhere in the world. We've partnered with Oak Ridge National Laboratory, who has a similar facility that's focused on uranium. Ours is focused on plutonium. And again, that's building off of our expertise from the decades of running the Savannah River site. We recently did an exercise with this facility, if you will, up in Alaska back in the spring. It got to, I did not participate, but talked to some folks who did, and it got to -39 Fahrenheit. And this is, for South Carolinians, this was a rather even larger shock. But the point of it was to demonstrate that the facility could be assembled, set up, started up. The instrumentation wasn't impacted by low temperatures. Last year, we did an exercise in the state of Nevada to simulate a desert type environment. And in the next year or two, they're talking about more of a tropical environment in the state of Hawaii. So obviously that's a trip that we think they'll have many volunteers that would like to go on, as opposed to the first two. So again, a unique capability that one would hope maybe we would never really have to use, but it's important to have this, and I'll speak about that in a little bit. So these are just some of the countries that we have interfaced with across the world that have nuclear materials. There are over 50 of them. And, you see places like Jamaica, well, why would they have nuclear materials? But they had a small research reactor that was started up a number of years ago, and they now have materials that need to safely be dispositioned from that country so that they can't basically fall into the wrong hands. We had a staff member last year receive a gold medal from the country of Hungary for his efforts in going into that country and helping them stabilize some of their nuclear materials. So some of it is not so much that we're handling those materials, but that we're providing the knowledge base that folks in those countries can work with it safely and stabilize it, really to make the world a safer place for all of us. So switching to environmental management, environmental stewardship, I mentioned the high-level waste tanks at the Savannah River site. The map in the upper left shows the sites that we've worked with across the country, the Department of Energy sites, with environmental remediation type problems. Those are not all high-level waste problems. But
Microphone drop down.
Is that better? Is that better? Try that again. Is that better? Okay, I'm not holding it close enough. I apologize. So as I mentioned, our environmental management, we do work really across the country with environmental management type issues. Some of them are high-level waste type issues, as I mentioned, for the Savannah River site. Some of them are cleanup of hazardous chemicals that are the result of various processing facilities that really ran in the 50s up till the 1980s. So we often will send researchers, scientists, and engineers to these facilities to provide consultation. Some of them will be bringing in commercial entities, but they're not used to working with these types of problems, and we can provide consultation to support them in that effort. We also, more recently, have been really advertising the technology development that we've put together. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is a device that has sensors and robotic capabilities on it that can go into a highly radioactive facility and map what the contamination is. Rather than sending people in, we can send that robot, if you will, in to map where the most hazardous components are located and put the right decontamination plan together. One of the things to keep in mind, a lot of these facilities across the country haven't been run in years and years, and were built and operated in the 50s and 60s timeframe. So there's not necessarily the paper trail, if you will, of what components are there. So that basically makes it a safer environment for the worker to work in. We also recently have reached out nationally from a consultation and leadership perspective. We led a team at the Hanford site out in Washington State to look at some problems they've had with their high-level waste tanks, vapors coming off the tanks that they could not characterize or understand. So we led a national effort, bringing in experts from across the country, from universities, academia, industry, to help them evaluate that problem and provide recommendations. And we've also led a team to evaluate what happened at the waste isolation pilot plant in the state of New Mexico, from the perspective of the government brought in various teams, but we came from a different perspective in technically trying to understand what happened so that we can make sure that it doesn't happen again. And then the international flavor, as you're all familiar with the disaster in Fukushima, Japan, back in 2011. If you think about what happened there, it really is an environmental problem similar to some of the sites we have in this country from a cleanup perspective. So the Japanese reached out to the U.S. government and ultimately to the Savannah River National Laboratory to help them in defining how they could clean up their spaces. The facility at Fukushima is in 1 square mile. So what we have in 300 square miles at the Savannah River site is all scrunched up into 1 square mile at the Fukushima site. And with some of the releases of radioactivity they had, it reached out several miles from the reactor. So we have put teams of people together and have sent them over there on a frequent basis to consult with the Japanese. And again, we're learning from them as well. Some of the things that they've tried and haven't worked or have worked, we're bringing back here to help with our cleanup issues here in this country. So that kind of gives you a flavor of some of the international aspects for the Savannah River National Laboratory. I mentioned earlier, energy is a small part of our portfolio, and as I mentioned, we look at it regionally. The picture in the upper right-hand corner is from the wind drive train test facility in Charleston that Clemson University is leading, and we have partnered in supporting Clemson in that effort, primarily from the data collection perspective, from the secure data. If you think about the energy and the grid, making sure that we have secure systems that can't be tampered with is critical to this country from an energy viability perspective. So that's bringing in some of our expertise in electrical and mechanical type engineering. Solar research, we have a fairly large materials organization. Again, these are small parts of our portfolio, but they are important. And then nuclear fuel, obviously, from the nuclear perspective. And the picture in the upper left-hand corner is the Hydrogen Research Campus in Aiken County. If you have ever been down there, there's a couple research buildings there that live in that's just off the Savannah River site. It's actually not part of the site, but we have several researchers from the laboratory who are housed there. So we're talking about technologies and commercialization. The partnership with commercial industry is really important to us, and we've put a focus on that the last several years. I mentioned the medical isotope work. We've teamed with Shine Medical Technologies in that area, and we're also working with a startup company with the tandem microwave system. These are all small efforts, but if you think about states such as South Carolina and building small enterprises that can build off of our technologies that we've developed at the laboratory, that's good for all of us from a business perspective, bringing in potentially new people into the state, into the area, getting people to stay. That's something that we've really been focusing on at the National Laboratory. Is we bring in people from outside the area, the region. We want them to stay. We want them to have a viable career and stay and live in South Carolina, ideally for their whole careers, and then retire here. So that's been a real focus area of it, and this technology development area is a way that we can do that. So when we talk about technology transfer, that's not just in South Carolina. We have agreements with organizations in 24 states across the country, and 10 of those are actually in the state of South Carolina. And this business area, as I mentioned, is not huge for us. It's been about $24 million over the past 6 years. But it's something that you go back to the days of not knowing what's done at sites like the Savannah River site. This is an opportunity to use the technologies that we've developed and built up over the years and carrying them into the commercial sector. And that's really important, again, from a viability perspective for our future and you know, really just from an economic growth point of view. And one of the other key areas that I think is really important to mention is education. Our employees at the laboratory and at the site spend a lot of time with teach-ins, and that could be at the elementary school level, the middle school level, the high school level. I think everybody recognizes how important that is for the next generation to get them excited about some of these areas, especially in math and science. So we really put a focus on that. We also have been focusing on interaction with regional universities. So you can see some of the logos up there from University of South Carolina, South Carolina State, Clemson, across the border at GRU, and also Georgia Tech and University of Georgia. So we're trying to focus on recruiting at those universities as well to bring in new folks. Intern programs, for example, in the summertime here, we probably have about 50 interns at the Savannah River National Laboratory, mainly from regional type universities. So that's a great opportunity for these students to have a summer job and earn a little bit of money, get some experience to put on their resume, but also it's some fresh set of eyes for us too. It gets our researchers a little bit more engaged with the next generation, if you will. And this is a really, really important area. If you were to look at the demographics from an age perspective of from our company, our site, and really across the complex, the average age can be well into the 50s, mid-50s. So we've done a fair amount of hiring the last few years and are trying to continue to do that and really trying to engage some of these new hires to stay. I think, and I spent a fair amount of time talking to a lot of them, they look to, well, I'll work there for a year or two and then go someplace else. Well, and that's going to happen. It's a different generation, if you will, but we're trying to get them excited about working at the Savannah River National Laboratory, living in Aiken, South Carolina, and the surrounding communities, and becoming engaged and staying here. So I think that's really important going forward. And many of our folks that we currently have degrees from many of these universities, and so that helps too, a big enticement to get people to stay in the areas where they're familiar with. Or, like myself, move from the Northeast and love it so much here in the Southeast that you want to stay for 25 years. So I think that's a real push for us, and I think organizations like you have here, I know the Rotary Club in Aiken often has speakers and things come in and tries to do things with younger folks, and I think that's a great thing and can help entice people to want to stay and live in a certain community. So I'm just going to close with just a couple of thoughts, looking to the future. We've had a lot of history of dealing with nuclear type weapons issues at the Savannah River site, but there's a lot more to be done, and an organization like the laboratory, we're trying to really reach out with the expertise and the technologies that we've developed over the years and interface with government entities, but also universities and industry. And perhaps, the picture in the upper left corner there is a rendition of perhaps a facility that could be built in the state of South Carolina that's a collaborative type facility where you have national laboratory researchers working side by side with commercial, perhaps engineers from a commercial company, students from a university, and then having, overseen by various government agencies. So I'll just leave that with a thought. That's something we're pushing to for the future, and hopefully can also build our stead here in the state of South Carolina. So I very much appreciate your attention. I know I focused on the laboratory, but hopefully gave you a little bit of a feel, and please do take a look at those brochures at the Savannah River site. And if there are any questions I can answer, I'd be glad to do that. Yes, sir.
You spoke of developing medical isotopes. I must confess that I'm ignorant on the subject of really isotopes in general, but developing isotopes is capturing elements. What is there dangers associated with doing that we should be concerned about?
So, and I'm not an expert either, although I know people and some of you maybe from the medical community. A medical isotope can be used to detect perhaps a tumor in the body, technetium. I won't even suggest, I'm not an expert on what types of isotopes are used for that. And so if you were perceived to, or thought to have a tumor, you might go in for a medical test, and they use an isotope to do as a tracer through your body to look for a tumor. So when I say we're developing them, that was probably a poor choice of words. We're helping to develop a process so that those isotopes can be safely produced and be available to the medical community to use for that diagnostic type testing.
Two-part question. First of all, are you doing any work to help support the research on small modular reactors? And secondly, can you give us an update on the MOX, the mixed oxides facility?
So from the small modular reactors, we are not actively doing any work there right now. We are having discussions with various entities, and we've offered our services. Keeping in mind we're a national laboratory, and so we offer our services to a broad range. So there's not anything active right now that at least I can speak to, but we certainly do have the capabilities that could support such an effort. As far as the MOX facility goes, again, I am not part of that facility, and so probably really couldn't speak accurately about that, except to say that the work is ongoing at the site that Ariba's running, and obviously the government is continuing negotiations of the path forward there. Yes, sir.
I want to make sure I understand this. You develop equipment that you've gone to places like Japan or whatever to help clean up the plutonium piece. Are you gathering plutonium waste pipelines and bringing them back to this site to be stored?
For Japan, speaking of Fukushima in Japan, we are not bringing anything back. That is, we're helping the Japanese in evaluating. There's many commercial companies from this country that have gone over there to Japan and offered their technologies to help them clean up. And so we're providing consultation on what might work and what might not work, but we're not bringing any materials back.
From anywhere?
Not from Japan. From the non-proliferation aspect, for materials that came from the United States, in some cases we do go over to various countries around the world and offer packaging type solutions of helping them package their materials to be brought wherever they need to be brought to. And it may be another part in their own country. If it's U.S. origin material, it may be bringing back to this country. So we provide expertise in safe packaging primarily of that material. Yes, sir.
Do you take advantage of any of the military installations? Because there's certain advantages in doing some of those, like Fort Jackson in particular.
I am not aware of a lot of work that we have with Fort Jackson, but that could be my lack of knowledge. We have started some discussions, as I mentioned on that one slide, with Fort Gordon over in Augusta, Georgia. The other thing we're doing is, because you make the point about the military installations, the Savannah River site, as you will, the site as a whole in some ways provides some unique real estate that's remote, it's guarded, it's fenced for various testing. So we are interacting a little bit with the Army, the U.S. Army, as far as how we can partner with them on some various aspects. And I may just be not knowledgeable about Fort Jackson in particular. Yes, sir.
Two questions. One is, one of your slides talked about products that you're developing. One of them was clean nuclear fuel. And that sounds like something I haven't heard of before, so I'd like, maybe you can tell us what clean nuclear fuel is. But the other question is, you talked to me earlier about how you immobilize the waste and what that process is that you go through to take some of that old waste and try to make it safe to be stored.
So let me touch on the waste question first. The high-level waste that's present at the Savannah River site and also at the Hanford site out in Washington State is it's a mix of just about every element in the periodic table. And there's various consistencies of that waste. Some of it is peanut butter-like consistency. Some of it's a salt, literally like a dried salt. And some of it is more liquid type material. So the first thing that's done is these are 1 million gallon waste tanks, so very large waste tanks. So very large pumps and mixing devices are put in those tanks to try and slurry it up as much as possible. Then it is transferred to a treatment facility where there's various chemical processes that are performed on it in order to make it compatible to go to what we call a glass melter. We convert this high-level waste into glass. And if you think about glass and all the uses of glass, this glass is black. It's not clear like your water glass, primarily because of the iron content, but it's just as durable from a leachability perspective. So those radionuclides become part of the matrix of the glass. We add glass-forming chemicals, as we call it, mix that up, and then send it to this high-temperature melter where we fill canisters that are 10 feet high and 2 feet in diameter with this glass material. And those materials, those canisters are currently stored at the Savannah River site in anticipation of transfer to a federal repository. So if you think about what the material was into what it is now, it is in a much safer state. One of the challenges with those waste tanks is they're not all the same material. So every one has to be treated just a little bit differently to make sure we make a product in the end that can meet all the regulatory and safety requirements. It's part of the fuel aspect, the clean fuel. And I'm not as familiar, I apologize technically, with this aspect of it, but it's primarily referring to how the fuel can be processed such that, in the end you produce less waste. So it's more efficient design, smaller, more compact, less waste produced. So that's where the clean aspect of it comes from. So again, most of the waste we're dealing with now was produced 30, 40 years ago. But going forward, if we can make, if you could think about the fuel aspect, make it cleaner to produce less waste, then that's a benefit.
You mentioned the nuclear deterrent, and obviously, as I indicated, Savannah River began producing nuclear fuel. As we continue going forward, I assume there is a modernization program, and that stuff has a half-life, so there needs to be new fuel to keep our deterrent. Where is that made now?
So the tritium that I specifically talked about is the facilities that tritium is a gas, and it's stored in reservoirs, and those often have to be repackaged. So that repackaging aspect of it, we do at the Savannah River site. From a production perspective, we don't have any operating reactors at the Savannah River site. So the main nuclear deterrent, the weapons aspect, are stored in other sites in other parts of the country. And our role is the tritium focus and repackaging it. And that facility is, you mentioned about modernization, about 5 or 6 years ago, had a modernization process that was undertaken in order to make sure that we were keeping up for the future. Yes, sir.
Isn't it true on the clean nuclear fuel that one of the big objectives of the MOX facility is to take spent nuclear weapons fuel and convert it into clean
That's correct.
Fuel?
That's correct. That's correct. Yes. Yes, sir.
I had a tour of the wind turbine research facility down in Charleston, and I found it fascinating but I'm curious as to exactly what your role would be at that location.
The primary role at that location is, we're not running the facility, we're helping them in the data management. If you think about, and I haven't been there myself, so you're more knowledgeable than I am, but if you think about all the data that's generated from the testing that's done there, and making sure that it can be transmitted securely, whether that be wirelessly or not, we are very much engaged with them in helping them develop systems to securely capture the data, monitor it, and use it to build off of itself for future testing exercises. So that's our main role at that facility.
Sharon, thank you for being here. Thanks for taking time out of your busy day to come speak to Columbia Rotary. And here's a token of our appreciation. I've asked John Bacus to come forward and share a little bit about what's coming up over the next 2 or 3 weeks as far as programs go, so that you're all aware of what's going on and we communicate about who's coming to speak, but also so you'll be thinking about who you might invite as a guest to one of our upcoming programs. John.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I don't know how many of you watched the bringing down of the Confederate flag, but did you realize that one of our members was the man the flag was handed to, and he carried it to its final resting place? Alan Roberson, I was going to get him to stand up and take a bow today, but he's sick and not here. But Alan was involved in that process and played a part in history. And as a result of that, I've asked Alan to be one of our programs coming up in the not too distant future to talk about the controversy that surrounded the flag and how it finally came to an end, and talk about what the future for the flag is. So I hope in a few weeks, Alan, we haven't worked out a time to do that, but hopefully before too long, he will be here to talk about that. So we have somebody with firsthand experience in that area. Next week, Lonnie Cooper is the CEO of Lonnie Carter is the CEO of Santee Cooper. And he will be here next week to talk about his company, which is the largest electricity producer in our state, and to talk a little bit about what they do and also about the future of energy, just to give us some insights on where he sees energy going. The week after that, Bruce Cannon will speak on mental health and talk about some of the issues that we deal with here in Richland County relative to mental health situation. In 3 weeks, Chip Wild, who's the president of Darlington Motor Speedway, is going to be here to talk about the upcoming race. I think it's on Labor Day weekend at the Darlington Motor Raceway. And so I'm going to encourage you to come yourselves, but bring any of your friends who are NASCAR fans. So maybe we can have a big NASCAR banner up here when he gets here. But so please come enjoy what he has to say about that. One of the things I'd really like to do with our programs for this year is to talk about topics of interest like this one today, but also to talk about things that are important to us as South Carolinians, things that are important issues in our state, things that we may be struggling with as a state, and some things that we all need to know about, so maybe we can make a difference in working on some of those issues. The other thing I'd like to do is try to move our organization a little bit more in the direction of some hands-on community service. We do a lot of things here by proxy, by raising money and by making sure that certain committees get done what they want to do. But I have a feeling from the couple of things we've done that some of you all want to be involved in actually doing a community service project. We are going back to Harvest Hope to do hopefully two more, at least one, maybe two more packing programs with Harvest Hope. And I'm just curious if any of you all have an interest in being involved in some other community service projects, and if you are, please get in touch with me and let me know and give me some ideas, things that you might like to do, and we'll work towards that end and try to get more of our members involved more directly in community service. Thank you. Thank you.
Please stand as we close the program today with a song.